Hey, yeah, you. Come sit down for a second, because I need to tell you about something that happened this week that the people who run American politics really, really do not want you thinking about too hard. Not the war stuff, not the tariffs. A primary election in a mid-sized Michigan district that most of the country couldn't find on a map, involving a man who quit his own campaign 3 weeks before voting day and won anyway. I know how that sounds. Stay with me, because this is not a quirky local news story. This is the receipt for something much bigger, and it lands directly on Donald Trump's desk. Here's the setup. Michigan's 8th Congressional District, Flint, Saginaw, Midland, Bay City, is the kind of seat that decides whether Republicans keep the House in November. Trump carried it in 2024. A Democrat, Kristen McDonald-Rivet, won the House seat anyway, which tells you it's genuinely up for grabs, not a lock for anybody. So, this was supposed to be simple. Trump endorses his guy. His guy wins the primary walking. His guy spends the fall beating up the Democrat. Everybody goes home happy. That is not what happened. Trump's guy was Amir Hassan, Navy veteran, former federal law enforcement officer, Flint native, family's been in Michigan for generations. Campaign promising tax breaks for nurses and firefighters. On paper, this is a Republican recruiter's dream candidate. Trump endorsed him in June, dragged him on stage at a rally at the GM Proving Ground in late July, called him a big hit. House leadership backed him. National Party money backed him. This was, by every conventional measure, a coronation. His main opponent was a retired GM engineer named Thomas Smith, who had so little money and so little operation that he mailed his campaign paperwork to the Federal Election Commission by hand because, and this is a real thing he wrote, he'd had no luck logging into the online portal, and nobody at the help desk was picking up. Somewhere in the middle of July, Smith did something candidates almost never do. He quit. On camera, endorsed a third guy, a retired mechanical engineer named Al Lemo, and told his supporters to go vote for him instead. Smith's name stayed on the ballot only because he dropped out after the legal deadline to remove it. So, on paper, going into Election Day, you've got the Trump-anointed favorite against a guy who isn't even running anymore, and a third guy nobody outside that district had heard of. And Trump's guy lost, not narrowly. Smith took just over 50%. Hassan came in at 33%. The man who quit the race beat the President of the United States' personal endorsement by nearly 20 points, of course, while doing zero campaigning in a district the National Party desperately needs to hold. Now, before I tell you why, let's deal with the boring, respectable explanation first, because somebody's going to offer it to you. The respectable explanation is name recognition, low turnout primary quirks. Maybe Hassan's law enforcement background didn't play well with a certain slice of the base. Who knows? These things happen. I want you to notice how hard that explanation has to work to avoid saying the actual thing, because in the weeks before the vote, what actually spread through Republican circles in that district wasn't a policy critique of Amir Hassan. It was the claim, repeated and amplified until it hardened into settled fact for a lot of these voters, that Hassan was secretly a Muslim. He isn't. He's Christian, has been for years. He made an entire video from the front seat of his car explaining that his family has been in Flint for generations, that he isn't an immigrant, that he isn't hiding anything, because the rumor had gotten loud enough that a congressional candidate felt he had to prove a negative about his own religion to Republican primary voters. That's the race. A man who dropped out of his own campaign beat a war-fighting, flag-waving Trump endorsee because enough voters decided the endorsee might be secretly Muslim, and that was disqualifying. If you think that's an isolated glitch, one weird district, I have bad news, because this is not happening in a vacuum. It's happening in the exact same window as a U.S. Senate primary in the same state, where Abdul El-Sayed, Rhodes Scholar, epidemiologist, son of 2 Egyptian engineers born and raised in this country, won the Democratic nomination outright. And the reaction from the national Republican apparatus wasn't a policy argument. His opponent's campaign put out a claim, flatly false, that El-Sayed thinks America deserved the September 11th attacks. The Senate Republican campaign arm started referring to him, very deliberately, by his full given name, a naming choice they hadn't bothered with in prior press releases, Because the point wasn't accuracy, the point was how it sounds. Trump, Vance, and prominent conservative media figures piled on within days, running the exact same playbook that got tested last year on a Muslim candidate for mayor in New York, except now it's been scaled up to statewide and national races. Of course it has. That's what a successful test does. You don't retire it, you deploy it wider. And then, the same week, you get the third data point, and this one is almost too on the nose to be real. At a Trump rally in Las Vegas, Nevada's Republican governor, Joe Lombardo, tried to honor a police officer who had just been shot and killed in the line of duty. 30 years old, former Marine. Name was Austin Abdul. The crowd started booing before Lombardo could even finish the sentence because, and there is no other explanation that fits the timeline, the sound of that name was, on its own, enough. Lombardo had to stop, tell the crowd twice that they were not booing a dead cop, and then hold the moment of silence he'd actually come up there to hold. Sit with that for a second. This was a Trump rally. These are, by self-description, the most pro-police, most pro-military audiences in American politics. And a fallen Marine veteran who died protecting them got a chorus of boos on the mention of his surname before anyone in that crowd knew a single fact about who he was. 3 separate events, 3 separate races, same week, same state, basically, same trigger. That is not a coincidence, that is a climate. And it did not build itself overnight. This has been architecture for a decade. You can trace it straight back through the travel ban, through the pile-ons against Ilhan Omar, through the squad era, through the recent New York mayoral race that clearly served as the field test for exactly this material. What's different now is the dial. This isn't fringe talk radio anymore. This is the sitting president, his vice president, his party's Senate campaign committee, and a chunk of his own base, all independently arriving at quietly Muslim as a disqualifying accusation against a war veteran in a swing district his party needed to win. Which brings us to the part where I'm supposed to tell you what it means, and I want to be honest with you about how uncomfortable this answer actually is for Republican strategists, because it isn't just morally ugly, it's strategically self-destructive. Michigan's 8th was a top pickup target. The National Party spent real money and real political capital getting behind Hassan. And their own voters, not swing voters, not moderates, the actual hardened Republican primary electorate, took that investment and threw it away over a rumor, in a district they now may well not win in November because the guy who beat him quit and did no fundraising and is going up against an incumbent sitting on over $5 million. Trump built the permission structure. Trump's rally crowds live in it now. And on this particular Tuesday, it came back around and cost his own party a congressional seat they needed. You spend years teaching people that a certain kind of name is inherently suspicious, and eventually you cannot fully control who they decide to point that suspicion at, even apparently your own endorsed Navy veteran. So here's where that leaves the country, because this is bigger than one House race. The redistricting fights happening in Republican-controlled state houses right now, Tennessee just carved up its last majority-black congressional district into 3 pieces to make sure it never elects a black representative again. And that's the same broader project, using the Supreme Court's gutting of the Voting Rights Act as legal cover. That's Plan A. Rig the maps before a single vote is cast. When Plan A alone isn't enough, this is Plan B. Or, honestly, at this point, we're somewhere around Plan C. It's not a healthcare plan. It's not an answer to grocery prices. It is raw, industrial-scale, religious and ethnic suspicion, aimed at American citizens, deployed as the substitute for an actual midterm agenda. And the uncomfortable truth for the people running that strategy is that it is a wildfire, not a scalpel. It does not stay pointed only at the opposition. It burns whoever the crowd decides looks or sounds wrong in the moment, including a Republican war veteran standing on their own stage, including a dead police officer who spent his last afternoon protecting the very people who booed his name. I'll leave you with this. Somewhere in Michigan right now, Amir Hassan is trying to figure out how to explain to his own family in his own hometown why proving his Christian faith in a car selfie video wasn't enough to satisfy people who share his party, his politics, and apparently his war record. Just not, they assumed, his religion. And somewhere in Washington, the people who built this machine are discovering that it doesn't actually come with an off switch or a target list. It just comes with a trigger. I'm Marcus Fenn. This is Borderlines. If you think stories like this deserve more attention than a single news cycle gives them, stick around. We're just getting started.